Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. So this week in episode 10, I want to talk about the Han Solo comic Imperial Cadet, which actually details the time that Solo was in the Imperial Academy. In the film Solo: A Star Wars Story, it goes into some degree of detail of what he's in. You kind of see him sort of sign up for it, and then it kind of flashes, and then suddenly he's meeting Beckett and his crew and things, and then obviously he meets Chewie and gets off the planet, and that's basically him leaving the Empire. So what this comic does is actually details a lot more of his time within the Empire and what that kind of alluded to. So before I get into the narrative side of things, I'm just going to give a bit of information about the comic, a little bit about Solo, and then I'll get into it. So this is a mini-series with 5 issues of comics in it. The first issue was out in November 2018, and the 5th and final issue was out March 2019. For reference, Solo came out May 2018, so this came out about 6 months or so after the film came out. The writer of this is Robbie Thompson, the artist is Leonard Kirk, and the colourist is Arif Prianto. Robbie Thompson also wrote the Target Vader miniseries, which I'll be covering in a future episode, and also the comic adaptation of Solo. A lot of people won't know this, but all the Star Wars films now, at the very least all of the new 5, the 3 episodic ones as well as the 2 anthology movies, they're all out in versions of comic form, which are generally almost like the extended versions, because a lot of films that are out, including Rise of Skywalker, Last Jedi things, the novelization has additional scenes in there and additional content, which is still canon. And the comics usually use that material. So there is an issue I'll be doing further down the line. Is a series called Thrawn, and anyone who knows Thrawn from either Legends or the Star Wars Rebels series will know that there's 3 Thrawn books out at the moment, and I think there's going to be another 3 on the way. And they released a comic book series of the first book, and so I'll go into that at a future date. But I thought I'd give a bit of information about that, because some people who may be really into comics, it's quite cool that you can collect. I think there's normally like 8 to 10 issues or so, which are about the amount of a film normally. So that exists, and Robbie Thompson did both the comic adaptation of Solo as well as this one, so I thought that was quite cool. And this comic series is set within the film Solo. I think I said that at the start, which Solo, the film, starts at 13 BBY, so 13 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the film ends at 10 BBY. So it's essentially a 3 years between the start of Solo and the end of Solo, but obviously there's quite a lot of time in the middle there. This series, it starts at 13 BBY, because that first scene in Solo when him and Kira basically escape the White Worms, which are Lady Proxima's thugs, manage to escape, get to that Imperial sort of border, and then obviously Solo gets through and Kira doesn't, and to escape the Imperials looking for him, Solo signs up to the Imperial Navy to hopefully become a starfighter pilot. That's where this starts off essentially. Just for a little bit of information about Han, he was born on Correlia, which is mentioned in Solo, I believe. It's around 32 BBY, so around 32 years before the events of A New Hope. So he's about 32 when he assisted blowing up the Death Star. And so at the start of Solo and in these comics, he's around 19 years old. And by the end of the Solo films, he's around 22 years old. And my opinion of these comics are that they're amazing. I'll give more detail at the end when I've kind of given a bit of narrative and stuff, but I think this is a really, really good comic series. It's a lot of fun. It's quite easy to read. There's some cool moments in there, and it gives quite a good insight into what the Empire was like. There's another comic book series called TIE Fighter, which it's a 4-part mini-series about a TIE fighter pilot, and I don't actually own that at the moment, but I'm going to be ordering that in the next month or so, and in that I'm going to go into a lot more of the detail of TIE fighters and things, but a little fun bit of information that you can surprise all your friends with, because I'm sure they love Star Wars trivia if they're anything like my friends. A TIE fighter, obviously it looks like a bow tie, so that's why the name probably got chosen sort of out of universe, but in canon it stands for Twin Ion Engines. I'll go into more details about TIE fighters and stuff when I do the TIE fighter pilot episode about the ship itself, but I just thought that was quite cool. And what's quite interesting about this mini-series as well is it actually links in with not only the Target Vader mini-series, but also the new series of comics that's only got, I think, the 4th issue out at the moment, called Bounty Hunters, which is set between episodes 5 and 6. So I'll get into more detail about that sort of towards the end, because it'll make a bit more sense there. But as I said, Target Vader is also written by Robbie Thompson, so it's interesting how he kind of bridges the gap in some way, but I'll get into that later. So I'm just going to basically do general bullet points of information of the narrative, just so you guys can basically absorb what happened in the plot. It's a really, really cool comic, as I said a minute ago. It's a lot of fun. There's, I think in the 4th comic, I don't talk about the narrative that much, because the majority of the comic is actually like a starship battle sort of thing. There's a lot of TIE fighters flying around, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I don't just want to sit here and describe what's going on in the comic, because that's not very exciting. I'm mainly here to give you general plot points so you get an idea of this, so it's enough information to get you by canon wise, but not so much information that it will take away from you reading the comics, because once again, these comics are actually really fun. And if anyone enjoyed the Solo, A Star Wars Story movie, I'd highly recommend buying the annual of this, which is when they put all 5 issues together and release that. But the Beckett comic that I actually reviewed or spoke about in episode 8, so 2 episodes ago, that Beckett comic is also included in the annual. So if you get the Han Solo Imperial Cadet annual, which was out May 2019, I believe, and it's well worth a read. The Beckett comic goes really well with this. I think Beckett is one of the better one-shots that is specifically associated with one of the movies. Obviously, I've spoken about it on this channel a fair amount, and it works really well. So Solo's a pretty good movie. Of all the Star Wars movies, for me it's fairly in the middle, it's pretty damn good, but I feel like this Imperial Cadet comic as well as the Beckett comic actually add quite a lot to them, so I would really recommend these ones if you're a fan of the Solo A Star Wars Story. So jumping right in, the first half of the first issue of Han Solo Imperial Cadet, it's essentially almost like an extended version of certain aspects of the start of the film Solo, A Star Wars Story. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, him and Kira escape Lady Proxima and the White Worms, which is the name of her sort of thug organisation, and they escape them, and you know the rest. In this comic, the first half of the comic is giving a bit more detail about that. It gives a few panels about what Kira and Han did as well before they stole some stuff from Lady Proxima. So that's quite cool, quite fun. It eases you into it. Obviously, it says about Solo, his last name being Solo. It's in the film because he said he's Han. He doesn't have a surname or doesn't come from anyone. He doesn't have a family or clan name or anything. So that random officer calls him Solo. I would just quickly say as well, because I catch myself doing this, I will sometimes say Han and I will sometimes say Han. It's mainly because throughout the Star Wars films, if you notice when people say his names, some people say Han, some people say Han. I keep messing it up and keep forgetting. I'm pretty certain he says in Solo it is actually Han, so I'm going to try and make an effort to say that, but in case anyone's getting bothered by it, I thought I'd point it out. I know I'm doing it, and apologies. Anyway, so Han goes into the Empire and he does basic training. In basic training, they say, and I've got this written as a quote, for the new cadets, you no longer have names, only numbers. If you survive training, you'll earn your name back. And Han's name is Cadet 124-329. So obviously immediately there, the Empire is stripping away any identity and they're immediately replacing you with a number, and that's how it sort of starts off. And it's a very good way of looking at the Empire, because I've got some other quotes here which I'll read throughout the comic series of how the Empire is basically treating people within the Empire. And one thing that I don't think I was aware of until I read this comic was that if you go into the basic training of the Empire, if you fail or if you try to leave, they will execute you. So once you say you're going to be going to the Imperial Academy, you basically always, well, you have to be into the Empire unless you're a deserter. And I will say, obviously, a lot of stormtroopers can't shoot, and that's kind of the joke there in the Star Wars films. Obviously, it's really just plot armor. It's just so the main characters can't get shot constantly. But it's quite fun to see that in some ways, even if you're quite a good shot or anything, if you're going through this training, which is pretty grueling and stuff, if you want to leave and you decide your heart's not actually in it anymore, you can't leave or they'll kill you, unless you want to become a deserter and basically spend your life on the run. So I think that maybe kind of gives a little bit of leeway for a lot of the stormtroopers, because a lot of them may not even want to be in it. They just kind of were like Han, and see, I did it there again, Han. They may be like Han, and they may want to just escape a really horrendous situation, and the Empire is their last choice to enroll in that. And that's obviously what Han did. So I just thought I'd add that in there as well. So Han questions in basic training. They're doing quite a lot of grueling things, running up and down hills and through the mud and all that sort of stuff. He asks what this has got to do with flying. One of the training officers hears him and says, "Oh, this cadet is questioning what this has got to do with flying. Well, how about you guys both run up that mountain over there and back twice, and hopefully it will sink in." So obviously, as soon as you ask any questions, everyone basically gets punished for it, and then straight after that, they basically all beat up Solo. One of them takes it a bit far, a cadet called 404-913, you get his name later. He basically tries to beat the crap out of him, essentially, quite violently, and he gets stopped by a couple of people, and then Solo's like, "Oh, thank you," and they're like, "Look, I don't want to help you." Essentially, the three people that stopped and helped, one of them is called Kanina Nico. She's quite like a strong woman, and she doesn't really take any crap from anyone, and she's pretty hard going, it seems, and seems to have like quite a hard outer shell. And then she's also with two twins. One is called Latan and one's called Tamu, and both of their surnames are Dree, so Latan and Tamu Dree. They're all seemingly human, and I don't generally read verbatim from the comics and stuff because I want people to experience it, but I just thought this exchange with these characters was brilliant. So this is basically the two twins talking to each other at Solo, essentially, just after Kanina basically saved Solo from being beaten up. So this is the two twins, and the pausing will be swapping between the twins. So it's, "Don't mind Kanina, sorry 803-308, she hates everyone, but she hates 404-913 the most. 913 thinks being the best means beating everyone into submission. The Empire seems to love him for it, to be honest. Why did we sign up for this again? We were starving to death on Boya. Oh yeah, the good old days. Why did you sign up to get off Correlia?" So I only want to read you that out because it was just quite funny. You can kind of tell already, these guys are quite cheery and chill about the whole thing, the good old days about starving to death. It was just, I thought I'd add that in there just because it's quite a fun comic, this. It's got some definitely dark moments, but it has that sort of Solo Star Wars vibe, which is, Solo, he's always making quips, he's always trying to be kind of jokey and funny, even when things are quite bad. So I just want to include that in there, that this comic really encapsulates the feel of the movie and the character very well. And then the last part of issue 1 is basically Han decides he's going to steal a TIE fighter, fly off and bail and get back to Corellia or whatever, and basically managed to outmaneuver pretty much everyone. He zooms through some cities and stuff, and he's doing a really good job, and then some TIE fighter shoots him, catches him, he crashes, he's fine, he's alive, and then stormtroopers surround him, and that's where issue 1 ends. So in issue 2, Solo is in lockup for 14 days. He's about to be executed, but then one of the flight instructors, who's quite high up, basically says, "I'm not going to get you killed this time, only on the basis that the flying ability that you showed when you basically stole that TIE fighter was incredible." And in fact, that flight instructor was the person who managed to shoot Han down. So he basically saved because of his flying ability. So from very early on, even in the film Solo and in this comic, Han has always had this knack when it comes to flying. And then speaks to the twins a little bit. He has another bit of conflict with the sort of brutish 913 cadet, and he managed to get out of that, and then they go to fly. The instructor, called Urib, says, this instructor who's the one who shot him down a minute ago and basically stopped him from being executed, his name is Urib. He says he's one of the finest pilots he's ever seen, but he has no discipline at all. So they do a training exercise, as in the brutish one, 913, as well as Kanina and the twins, Solo and a few other people. And on the training exercise, stuff happens, and one of the twins, basically his TIE fighter, starts to mess up, and Han fails the mission to save the life of one of the twins, and that's basically how this comic ends. So the next comic starts with the cadets on chore duty. Han then stays up really late and gets all the chores done and things, and then in the morning, this other one, 913, who's the brutish cadet, I'll say his name now because that's basically when it gets revealed, his name is Valance. They all have their names and things now. I believe it was actually in issue 2 where they all can call each other their names as opposed to the numbers because they got through basic training, essentially, even though Solo didn't kind of technically, but still, I imagine he did enough of the basic training before nicking the TIE fighter to actually get through and things. So this person called Valance is the brutish person, which I was calling 913 earlier. And just quick, another thing that the Empire has said, and it kind of gets echoed, this is a direct quote: independence will not be tolerated. So even though they've got their names and things, the Empire is still going home at, you are not important, you are not an individual, you are part of the Empire, that is your role, that is the only important thing about you. So anyway, as I said, Han did those chores. In the morning, Valance gets all the credit for it. So then Valance gets to fly a TIE fighter and thing on this special mission, while the rest of them basically get left with this really boring Freighto mission where it's the twins, the girl, and Han basically on a ship for 3 days, and they just have to meet the other group of cadets once their mission's basically over. While they're on the ship, as I said, it is just the twins, Kanina and Solo, and Han basically tweaks the engines and makes it faster. He then also manages to find some day passes, and then also convinces the group to go to a pleasure cruiser. Now, a pleasure cruiser, it seems to be basically just like a casino sort of thing. I imagine there's a few other things you could probably get away with over there. And I believe that actually Dryden Voss, which is the guy who had sort of the scratches on his face in Solo, the main sort of villain, his yacht, I believe, is like a pleasure yacht. So it's that kind of thing where, there's drinking, there's gambling, there's a lot of things like that. So Han basically manages to convince the group to go on this pleasure cruiser, and then Kanina realises Han's plan and basically says like, well, you obviously made the engines faster, you somehow must have stolen the day passes. When you made the engines faster, that must have been because when you stayed up late at night and did all of our chores, you had access to this, and you had access to this next. You know what I mean? So him doing those chores late at night was not only a nice thing to do, but it was primarily so he could accumulate a few things, getting ready for this mission that they were going to go on, so he could sort out the engines to move faster. And the reason he did that was because the whole mission was meant to take about 4 days. They managed to almost get to their destination within 3 because Han sped up the engines, and then he's like, well, we've got an extra day, we can either get there a day early or we can chill for a day. And the day passes are basically, so from what I can gather in this comic, if you got stopped by any Imperials, you could say, look, I've got this day pass, I'm allowed to be here. I believe it's potentially some sort of reward system in the Empire, but in this comic it doesn't specifically stipulate. So on the pleasure cruiser, I won't bore you with all the details of that because it's just a bit of fun and learn stuff, but Han speaks to an Ithorian, and an Ithorian is kind of hard to describe. There's quite a few of them in Star Wars. They kind of look, the top of their heads almost look a bit like a hammerhead shark, and they've got like a long sort of thin head, and they've got like a mouth on the side where their neck would be almost. It's quite hard to actually describe them. If you type in Star Wars Ithorian online, you'll find it. But yeah, kind of hammerhead shark-ish, but not really shark-like. It's just the sort of weird T-shape of them. You've seen them in Star Wars. When you look it up, you'll definitely recognise them. So he speaks to this Ithorian who he knew from Correlia. He asks if he knew about Akira. They have a little sort of exchange there. And then the Ithorian is about to sort of cross him and about to say, look, it's an Imperial, you shouldn't be here, blah, blah, blah. But in that, the Ithorian spoke to Han and said, I've been cutting stuff off the top, I've been doing jobs for people, but stealing a little bit, just to keep myself going. And then when this Ithorian goes to basically try and make a scene about Han immediately goes to the security. And it turns out that Han at the start spoke to the security, got them to record the conversation, and then the Ithorian goes. And while all that sort of ruckus is going on, Han and the crew manage to basically leave. They get back to their freighter, and then Han says, do you have a fun time? I hope you guys don't sort of rat me out and things. Please don't. And then the comic basically ends with the reports that Kanina was giving, who's, the sort of harder one who you think wouldn't really like Solo very much. And she basically gives him a completely fine report. No one mentions anything about the pleasure cruiser, so the little gang basically got away with it. The cadets are basically told that the following day, that the next mission they're going to have is not going to be a drill, it's not a training mission, it's a full-on true mission. It's on the planet Kulosk, with a Q. I couldn't find any other appearances of Kulosk in any other content, so it's just in this comic it seems. And essentially the Imperials are trying to occupy it, so they're going over and trying to kill all the hostiles in a standard Empire-like way. And they're all of the cadets and things are flying TIE fighters. And what actually happens is Solo is getting followed by a couple of enemy ships. Valance, that brutish guy, covers Solo, and then Valance gets shot down. So Solo basically talks Valance through a couple of random things to do within a TIE fighter, turn the engine off, then suddenly flood them, and XYZ, and basically gets him to not crash as hard. And then Solo goes to basically try and save Valance, whose TIE fighter's crashed and seems like he would be okay. But then the Empire says, nope, we're not extracting him. Your mission is to shoot out these guns, shoot out the cannons. You've done that. Now you're coming back because we're going to start bombing. So you basically have to leave him there. And then issue 4 basically ends with the twins, Kanina and Solo. They're getting told by the superior, that Europe guy. He says, look, I don't want you touching a TIE fighter. You aren't allowed to go and save Valance using a TIE fighter. No. And so what do? Well, because the wording wasn't too specific, Solo basically grabs some speeder bikes, which are seen in, most famously, Return of the Jedi on the forest moon of Endor when Luke and Leia are flying them through the forest. They're pretty much everywhere in Star Wars. But yeah, they steal the speeder bikes, and that's how the thing ends. So the 5th and final comic, starts with Solo basically telling the guys that he didn't disable the speeder's tracking because he was hoping that the Empire would see the fact that they're going in to try and, potentially save Valance or do something else, and would hope that they would not bomb the city like they were originally planning on doing. Solo was obviously being a bit too optimistic there, so the bombing starts. They manage to escape some of the bombing and things, and then they find a place to hide. They're not too far from Valance. They basically manage to find him, and one of the twins patches him up a bit because he's got some pretty horrendous injuries. It seems like he's lost an eye, he's got some damage on his face, his arm's a bit messed up as well. So yeah, one of the twins kind of patches this up and then says, okay, cool, now we need to get out of here before the Empire starts the second bombing run. And just another little quote here, Urib actually says, "We're going to wipe this city off the face of the planet," which just goes to show once again how brutal and unforgiving the Empire are for these sort of things. So the cadets trying to escape, and they get surrounded by the hostile enemies that are there. The hostile enemies are called Kuloskians. Once again, don't seem to appear in any other content. So these Kuloskians are basically about to shoot them all. And then another species who seem to be living there, who are more humanoid, are called Gulars. Gulars are basically almost like pink humans, like actually the colour pink, like proper pinky purple. There's a little bit of differences between them, like their noses are a bit different, but they're quite humanoid. Whereas the local hostiles, the Kuloskians, they are kind of big hulking beasts in a sense. They've got 4 arms and 2 legs. Then they're kind of like, imagine the Hulk mixed with Dexter, as in Dexter from episode 2 of Star Wars, Attack of the Clones. When Obi-Wan goes and speaks to him in that diner, he's that 4-armed guy who's kind of like friendly with him and things. If you kind of imagine him mixed with the Hulk, that's kind of what these things look like. So anyway, these things are surrounding the guys, and then these Gulars, these pink people, basically save them, and they basically said that they were slaves to this green menace, and they were mining something called Farium, which is meant to strengthen starships. Farium, F-A-R-I-U-M, hasn't been mentioned in other canon content as far as I can see, but yeah, it's this material that helps strengthen starships apparently. And so the cadets basically let them go because obviously the Empire would probably capture them and slave them again, because what the Gulars actually say is that, look, we're slaves here, the Empire's just going to come in, they're going to kill everyone except us, they're going to keep us as slaves, and then they're just going to use us to mine this Farium until we die again. We don't want that to happen, we just want to escape. There's a crash ship right near them, and Solo basically says, yep, go ahead, just take those escape pods, go. And within that, you get a bit more information about Kanina. Previously in the comic, I forgot to mention that she speaks to Han about Kira. He says, oh, do you have someone at home that you care about? And he says, yes, called Kira. And she says, oh, I've got someone too called Weegee, W-E-E-G-E-E. Interesting name. And she basically says, what you've got with Kira sounds the same as what I've got with Weegee. And then basically where these Gulars have told them what the Empire's going to do with this Farium stuff, essentially Kanina says, oh, the planet I've come from has a Farium. I think the Empire is probably going to go there next. I can't have the Empire going there and turning Weegee and the rest of my people into slaves and things. I don't know what to do. And she's getting very upset about these things. So what Solo does is he grabs her TIE Fighter helmet, throws it, shoots a hole in it, and then says something like, oh, it's a shame she didn't make it, isn't that right? And then Valance and the others go, yeah, it was a real shame, she was such a good cadet. And Valance says a little, yeah, she was the second best pilot of all of us. Obviously saying that Valance is insinuating that he's the best one. So they basically say, look, we'll cover for you, you can go and be free. Solo says, look, I'm going to try and escape constantly, don't you worry about me, this is your opportunity, you can go, it's fine, get on this escape pod, go find Weegee. So basically the gang of them get back without Kanina. The final sort of panels of the comic is quite nice. It's got Kanina. She does get reunited with Weegee, so it's quite a nice wholesome thing. And the last little bit I want to say actually is about the character Valance. Now, Valance, at the end of this comic, he's basically getting patched up by the Empire. He seems to have some sort of cybernetic thing in the side of his head where his eye was. He has to have a cybernetic leg, and also his arms are a bit messed up, so he has to have that cybernetic as well. So he's got quite a lot of injuries and things, and he actually gets told that the Empire won't cover any of those costs and things. So he's basically just going to have to work in the Empire forever to pay off those debts, and he's also permanently grounded, so he's never allowed to fly a TIE fighter again. And that, and obviously the little wholesome bit with Kanina and Weegee, that's how the comic ends. And as I say, it's a really, really cool comic. I tried to sort of skim over some of the information there because there is a bit more to it than that. There's a bit more information about the twins and stuff like that. It is a really, really fun comic. Now, I just want to add a couple of quotes from the Empire, and then I'm going to talk about Valance a little bit more. The other things about the Empire is that they obviously kill failures, because if you fail in the army, then they'll just kill you. And then the other two things that have been said across the comics is, at one point it says, the Empire is order. So, it's basically like we have to be the ones to be order through all this chaos, that sort of fascist tone to it. And then the other side is, soldiers die, the Empire marches on. And that's what Europe says to Solo about Valance, when Solo's like, look, we need to go back, we need to save him. And Europe is like, nope, he's a soldier, he's meant to die for us, that's that. The Empire marches on, because the Empire just doesn't care about any of the people who are in their army, or really any of the people in it, if I'm being honest. They just care about control, and that's what this comic is very good at reinforcing. It gives quite good insight into inside the Empire, how it all sort of works and things. So the last things I'll talk about is basically just Valance. Now, early in the comic I didn't immediately say his name, because it's not revealed, I think, until comic number 2 or 3. And essentially, if anyone reads a lot of the other Star Wars comics and things, then you may recognise Valance's name. Now, I mentioned earlier that Robbie Thompson, has the writer of this, has another comic mini-series called Target Vader, which I've got but I haven't actually read yet, if I'm honest. But Target Vader, one of the characters in it is actually called Valance, and he's got cybernetic side to his face, and a cybernetic hand, and a cybernetic leg. Well, it's the same character. So I quite like the fact that the writer has included that as well. But there's a comic book series called Bounty Hunters, which only started semi-recently. I think it's the 4th issue or so is out. And that series also has Valance in it. So what they've managed to do is, there was a character in this comic, and he got really badly injured by serving the Empire. The Empire didn't want to essentially cover him and sort him out, so he defected and became a bounty hunter, which I think is really, really cool. I like it when characters show up in other content, rather than just like every mini-series getting loads of new characters who just never show up ever again. It is cool to have characters where things happen, the stuff that happens isn't necessarily related in Solo Imperial Cadet to the other storylines that Valance is in, but obviously seeing how he got his cybernetics, that's quite cool, and I did really like that aspect of it. So I'm going to be speaking about Target Vader and eventually the Bounty Hunter series further down the line. Bounty Hunters at the moment is quite early stages, as I said. It's only on like issue 4 at the moment, so that I don't think the first arc is even finished. So I try and read them in arcs, so I haven't even started reading the Bounty Hunters comics yet. I'm just going to wait until the first arc sort of finishes, and then I'll read that, because that's kind of how I like to sit there and like read a comic for like an hour or so. So that when I go into the information about Target Vader, and more likely about Bounty Hunters, I'll then kind of line up things with Valance a bit more, because I'll have more information. But I didn't want to just go on the Wikipedia page and then just read everything about Valance and then just sort of blurt it out to you, because this is all about Solo. I just want to add in the fact that if you had read some of the other comics, Valance is the same character, and hopefully he's going to show up in some of the other comics as well. I know that in the main run of Star Wars comics, which I spoke about last week, that ends with a sort of crossover with Dr. Aphra, Vader, and the characters in Star Wars. They also cross over with the characters in the series Bounty Hunters. It's a special called Empire Ascendant, and it is the bit of canon material that happens directly before Empire Strikes Back. It's right before the Battle of Hoth and things. So in that, the Bounty Hunters stuff all kind of happens a bit more. So I'm going to try and marry up things in the timeline and stuff when I get to that, but that's essentially all I want to say on that matter. So that's basically it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little episode of me chatting about Han Solo Imperial Cadet. God, I've been saying that so many times. this chat, I apologise. I really hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun talking about it. I've obviously got my other podcast, Genuine Chit-Chat, which is me talking with guests. I recently have had Scott and Chris, Scott from the 20th Century Geek podcast, and Chris from Comics in Motion, which is obviously the feed where you'll be listening to this. And also, I've got an episode coming out tomorrow, which will be Sunday the 24th of May, and that is going to be with Max Byrne of Mandatory Marvel and DC, as well as Dave Horrocks of Comics in Motion as well, and Mandatory Marvel and DC is also on the Comics in Motion feed. And we just talk about DC movies. We actually talk about the Snyder Cut, funnily enough, because as we went to record, it got announced the Snyder Cut was released. So talk about DC Comics, that sort of thing. Obviously, if you listen to this, you may have an interest in comics and DC, and we talk about the movies and what went wrong with Batman vs Superman and Man of Steel, not these other things as well. So if that sounds like your bag, make sure you check out Genuine Chit-Chat. as I said, I have a different guest every week, and I let them talk a lot more because obviously in this you just listen to me waffle on for 15 minutes to half an hour. So yeah, just thought I'd plug that as well as all the other great shows on Comics in Motion. And, in the description, I've included a little bit of information about it too. So really hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next week, and may the Force be with you.